apart from the Front d'Action Populaire and the urbanization wants you to take a look at housing. We want you to build, can you give me a figure today on the number of social housing units your party proposes to build? Well, it would be more than 100,000 in Quebec for sure, to be proportional, but I'm not going to commit myself to building social housing because my ambition is not to become Prime Minister of Canada. On the other hand, I do think that we should be building hundreds of thousands of housing units. Social housing is one category only because it's the lowest, it's the easiest, the cheapest to build because you can have affordable. Affordable housing is perhaps not the best the best method because you're financing privately owned houses. But you want to contain speculation, like at least you slow it down, and after that you have to help people to become owners. But the very basis is rental units.
The federal government in the past has participated in building social housing in the 50s, for example, bringing up the amount of social housing to 10% of our rental units. That's now down to 5% in Montreal. I was wondering whether your party would encourage the federal government to invest in social housing. First of all, by encouraging them to respect Quebec jurisdiction. I would also remind you that municipalities are in best place to understand the needs and the capacity of the urban fabric and in order to be able to choose where to build a social or student housing. This has to be a down-up approach, but really interfering in Quebec jurisdiction is not something I'm going to caution.
Ms. Blanchette, since 1941, a pipeline has brought oil from Portland, Maine to Montreal. Over the years, it has brought hundreds of millions of barrels of oil, much of it from OPEC dictatorships. Why have you never, not even once, opposed OPEC conflict oil being imported through an aging pipeline? Why do you prefer OPEC conflict oil over Alberta ethical oil?
I seem to believe that you already have the answer you want to write, so your question seems to contain the answer. I believe I am the one who authorized the change of direction in Enbridge Line B in 2013, which seems to prove that I'm not a fanatic against oil. But I believe that we've got to reduce our consumption of oil progressively, including from Alberta, because we are clearly being very expensive for every family in Quebec and Canada and destroying the whole planet. The denial of the reality of climate change since the beginning of this campaign and the change of heart of Mr. Carney, who decided to be more conservative than Mr. Poilievre, is very harmful for environment.
Ms. Blanchette, just to follow up on that question, your party and your stance on pipelines would seem to be diametrically opposed to Quebecers. A poll came out showing that 74% of Quebecers support the building of new pipelines. Why are you and your party not in sync with the majority of people in this province, sir?
Don't you know my love for commenting polls? Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Question en français, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Blanchet.
Mr. Blanchette, the hub, since the 7th of October 2023, the Jewish community has been facing anti-Semitic behavior. 6,219 attacks. In 24, there were demonstrations in front of synagogues, attacks against Jewish businesses and schools. Pierre Poilievre said that anybody who is here on a visitor's visa who breaks the law should be deported. Do you think that a permanent resident who commits anti-Semitic attacks should be able to stay in Canada? All those who are here in Canada should be liable to prosecution under Canadian law. law. But we're in a specific situation where it's difficult to actually see it clearly. In Quebec and in Canada, the Jewish community is facing violence from radical Islamic populations. But in Gaza, it's the Palestinian people, excluding Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, which has to be eradicated. But it's the Palestinian population that's subject to unacceptable violence by Mr. Netanyahu's regime. The only possible solution is a two-state solution. And this is our position, that we should perhaps even consider creating a Palestinian state now. Albertans are frustrated with Canadian federalism, and they think that Canada is no longer working for them because the federal government really undermines their economic prosperity. As leader of the Bloc Québécois, what do you think of an Alberta sovereignty project? While I want to speak to the will of Albertans to become a sovereign nation, a nation defines itself and therefore should have the right to self-determination, but the desire to exploit oil is not the definition of a culture or a country.
Mr. Blanchet, Touria, Isri Global News. Why do you believe that Quebec would be better off fighting Trump alone?
I don't believe that anybody can be better off fighting Trump alone. I believe that we have to build alliance between equals. It means Canada and Mexico and European countries and Asian countries and Quebec. Canada does not have to be a province of Mexico to ally with Mexico against Trump. Quebec would not have to be a province of Canada to ally with Canada and Mexico against Trump. It won't happen in the coming months, of course, but the idea is for an economy. Quebec economy is different from Canadian economy, and it has to be treated accordingly. So far, all we have seen is efforts being deployed in order to protect Ontario economy, which is the way Canada defines itself. And nothing has been done when, let's say, lumberwood industry in Quebec has paid $2 billion in tariffs, specific kind of tariffs, which name in English I don't know, to the Americans. And it is to the industry, car industry, that Mr. Carney said that he would give $2 billion, nothing in Quebec. He even said that he had got $30 billion of tariffs, counter tariffs, about aluminum. Nobody seems to know about that. Where does that come from, and where did the money go? There seems to be no such thing. The problem is that when Quebec aluminum goes to the United States and is transformed in the United States and comes back in Quebec with tariffs, we pay to use our own aluminum and inflict inflation on our own people. This is not the right way to manage the aluminum situation.
We've got less than 2 weeks left of this campaign. How are you going to convince Bloc voters who are considering voting Liberal to come back to you instead?
Exactly like I did tonight.
And what do you think was most convincing tonight?
I hope as much of it as possible was convincing. I'm not the one to decide about that. It belongs to the population of Quebec.
Une question courte, rapide.
A very quick French question, please.
Bonsoir, Monsieur Blanchet.
Hello, Mr. Blanchet. Simien Filetro, Radio-Canada. I won't take you by surprise by announcing that Aboriginal issues were not really dealt with during the debate. What space do you have for Aboriginal issues in your program, and how do you intend to protect their rights, which seem to diverge from those of Quebecers? Well, first of all, I would say that the Aboriginal issue was not dealt with, not even when we were talking about culture. And I wondered myself how it was possible in a negotiation process with the U.S. When the 13 territories and provinces, including Quebec, have their own economies, 13 economies, unlike what Mr. Carney said. And no one has said, well, where are the Aboriginal nations? This is not something that's been raised. These are self-governing nations, and they could be very precious allies in any negotiation with the U.S., right? That's not something that's been dealt with like other topics, the environment, for example. That's all been swept under the rug.
Vous n'allez pas nous gosser avec l'environnement.
And basically what they're saying is to don't talk about the environment. We have to focus on oil for Canadian sovereignty. And the Americans consider that Canadian oil belongs to them already, or mostly so. They don't feel guilty about that. Well, not much anyway. Another thing that we haven't talked much about is on energy. The transportation of energy, including the green energy projects that we could develop in Canada. Well, basically, that's naturally would go north-south, right, rather than east to west. And then, of course, we can do polls on this after Mr. Carney, Mr. Poilievre, and both will both be talking about energy east. And there are many people, however, in Canada that really are not thinking about the environment, and Quebecers are very sensitive to those issues still. That's all the time we have. Sorry, that's the end of this press conference. See you again tomorrow.